Our guest today is Tom Ball, Senior Vice President of Alliance Advisors. He's based up near New York City. He's been in the proxy solicitation business forever. I've known him a long time. He's a great guy. I'm Brock Romanek, today on Zippy Point. So Tom, proxy fights is your forte. Hats off to you.
Thank you, sir.
Anytime, even when I worked at the SEC, anytime I worked on a proxy fight, I immediately got sick. I got the flu or a cold. It was brutal. When you're brought into a proxy contest, what is the first thing you traditionally do with a client?
First thing, when we're working for an issuer, which we typically do, first thing you want to do is a deep dive into the shareholder base. Who owns the company, who votes the shares. Look at how many shares are owned by individuals, either registered or beneficial. And that's important because those shareholders tend to vote differently than holders like institutions. So you want to parse those out. You want to know how many shares are owned by management, the board, company plans. And when you're looking at that, you need to make sure you're not counting option shares that they don't actually have the right to vote. So you want to drill down and make sure you know what they have in hand to vote. And then most importantly, you want to look at the institutions. How many shares are owned by institutions? And most importantly, how do they vote? Are they influenced by the proxy advisory firms like ISS and Glass Lewis? And if so, how strong is that influence? For some institutions, the ISS recommendation comes out, they'll follow that recommendation. For others, they look at ISS and Glass Lewis, but they have internal guidelines. So you want to know, what's the influence of the proxy advisory firms? And is it weak or is it strong? And then based on that analysis of the shareholder profile, we put together what some people might call a vote projection. What are your chances of winning? I always like to refer to it as kind of the path to victory. Here's the shareholder profile. Here's the dissidents agenda. What's the path to victory? What do we have to do to win here? Do we have to get ISS? Do we have to get Glass Lewis? If we don't get ISS, can we still win? In many cases, the answer to that is yes, even though people might think otherwise. So know the profile, know the agenda of the dissident, and then here's what we need to do. We, the proxy solicitor, and you, the company, to get this vote over the finish line.
So this is a naive question, but how do you get your hands on the dissidents' agenda, their plan? And then once you do, can you drill down into an assessment of that plan would look like?
Yeah. It's not hard to get your hand on the dissidents plan because normally it comes out, 3 o'clock on a Friday before a weekend, and and it's fully done. They put out a press release with a plan, detailed plan with what's wrong with the company, and here's how we're going to fix it. And keep in mind that these days, especially activists, dissidents, call them what you will, they've been studying the company for a long time. They didn't just buy in yesterday and come out with a plan. They've studied the company for months. They've talked to former employees, suppliers, large shareholders, maybe the press, behind the scenes, just to get a flavor for the company. So in some cases, they know the company better than the company themselves. So their plan is going to come out. It's going to be fully formed for the most part. Here are the financial metrics, here's what's wrong with the company, and here's our plan to fix it. So the plan is going to be there. From the beginning what you're fighting.
And what approach should management have if they decide they do want to fight?
Well, I tell clients that if they're planning to fight, they're going to have to dig in and plan on dedicating a lot of time to the fight. I tell them, clear your calendar for the next 8 weeks, because it's not like a routine annual meeting where the company sets the agenda, they set the schedule. You're in a reactive mode when you're in a proxy fight, and you have to be prepared to respond quickly. Again, a Friday night, a proxy fight letter will come out, and you've got to respond to it by Monday morning. So if you decide to fight, be prepared for a long haul, and you need to have a team. I tell companies, you need to have a team internally, general counsel, head of IR, senior management, and directors. Not the whole board necessarily, but who are the best directors to put out facing the public. And then externally, you need an experienced law firm, an IR firm, proxy solicitation firm, all working together as one team with that internal team.
And as I mentioned, as I've experienced it, proxy fights are not for the weak of heart. How do you periodically reassess what management's approach should be as a proxy fight goes on?
That's an ongoing process, and it's based on feedback from the institutions, based on what you're hearing from analysts, from the press. But the company will be out talking to institutions constantly for that 6 to 8 week period leading up to the meeting, and the feedback that they get comes back to us as a proxy solicitor, and we'll adjust our view of the chances of winning the fight based on that on almost a daily basis.
Then how do you obtain reports, or how often should you, about how the vote is looking in the proxy fight? Because the votes are cast over time.
Right.
And typically not at the meeting itself.
Right. Yeah, that can be a challenge because a lot of the voting occurs very late in the process. The institutions don't vote until a week, 2 weeks, or 2 days before the meeting. So early on in the process, you'll see the individual votes from beneficial owners and street name or from record holders. And even though they don't typically hold a lot of shares, it kind of gives you an indication of which way the wind's blowing. If you're early voting from retail holders, beneficial holders, record holders is 60% negative, that's not a good sign. The people aren't happy out there might be the indication. But it's not till later in the process that you start to see the institutional vote.
And unlike in a typical annual shareholders meeting, where I imagine you don't see many shareholders revoking their proxies and
Right.
changing their mind, you might see that in a proxy contest. How often does that happen?
It's interesting. It's individuals are different from institutions. Individuals, I've seen proxy fights where management does 5 mailings and the dissident does 6 mailings, whatever. And at the end of the process, when you look at the voted cards, you'll see that individuals voted each card, management, dissident, boom, boom, boom. And the last card that goes in is the one that counts. So some individuals will change their vote constantly because they get a letter from the company that's persuasive. They go, oh, I'm going to vote for you guys. And then they get something from the dissident that's even more persuasive. And say, oh, I'm going to change my vote. So an individual, again, can vote every card that they get. It's the last one that counts. Institutions, on the other hand, they're going to wait. And I put them in 2 buckets. One is institutions that are strongly influenced by ISS and Glass Lewis. They're going to wait till that report comes out, and they'll vote based on what ISS or Glass Lewis says. In advance, you can talk to them, try to convince them to vote for you, but they'll follow ISS and Glass Lewis. So literally the day that report comes out, you get a significant increase in the vote from those strong followers of ISS and Glass Lewis. For the other institutions who have their own internal guidelines, some of them wait till the day before the meeting, 2 days before the meeting to vote. They look at the ISS report and the Glass Lewis report, but they want all the information that they can get so they don't have to change their votes. They wait till, again, a day or 2 before the meeting to vote, which can be pretty frustrating because the vote doesn't jump very much after ISS and Glass Lewis. You don't see it until, again, a day before the meeting or so. And what can take place at that point is, some lobbying of the institutions that haven't voted, or those who have voted trying to change their vote. There's often some horse trading going on, management committing to changes to governance or compensation programs, the dissident committing to reducing their slate, from a majority to minority. So there's horse trading that goes on, and that can change votes. But typically, once an institution makes their mind up and votes, that's pretty much done.
And if I'm remembering correctly, the average number of proxy contests in a single year is usually around 50. And the profile of companies that, there might be certain industries that are more prone to proxy fights, and the size of the company traditionally matters, I guess, more mid-sized, smaller companies.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I imagine most companies don't expect they'll ever be involved in a proxy fight, but for those that think about it, how should they prepare? Any tips?
Primary tip is once the first shot is fired, it's too late. The company is already in the crosshairs. and there's not a lot they can do at that point. So what the company should be doing is don't wait for that first shot to be fired. Prepare in advance, whether it's annually or biannually. Take a look at what the threat is of a proxy fight. Your proxy solicitation firm can look at your vulnerabilities from corporate governance to environmental, social issues, diversity, etc., which are often used as a lever in a proxy fight. So you want to know what your vulnerabilities are. Your investment banker can look at your vulnerabilities from a financial perspective. Law firm can look at vulnerabilities from a legal perspective. Your IR firm or PR firm can look at vulnerabilities from their perspective. So doing an analysis before that first shot is fired, so you're ready and prepared, and you're making changes, because once that first shot is fired, once a fight is started, anything a company does is reactive, and people look at it as reactive. So instead of getting 100% credit for doing something good, you get 10% credit, because people go, you only did it because of the activists. So it's too late to do things often once the fight is started. If you do them in advance, again, you get good credit for that. So if you're making governance changes because you think you have a vulnerability, do it in advance, you get credit for it. You do it afterwards, you don't get much credit for it.
You remind me a little bit of Cool Hand Luke, so I can imagine you're a pretty cool customer when it comes to these proxy fights, and that helps to keep calm, keep centered and balanced, and
absolutely, yeah,
not overreact. But you do have to react, because you can't just sit there and wait.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for your guidance, Tom.
Okay.